There is a difference between a daimyo and shogun. There are books out there that are much more in-depth than what I'll share today, but here's a little brief synopsis of the two. In ancient Japan, there was a whole spectrum of classes of samurai culture. There was a caste system that was divided into about 4 parts. You had your warriors, you had your merchants, you had your artisans, and your farmers. You also had outcasts. Within this, you had very poor samurai who could barely afford to keep their status. And you had the other end of the spectrum, which is what your question was about. There were shogunates spanning vast periods of time, consisting of powerful families that had many responsibilities and also many enemies. So what is a shogun? A shogun is like a feudal king or a lord commander-in-chief. Shogun were appointed by the emperor, who were kind of de facto rulers. This shogunate persisted for 700 years. The well-known Tokugawa shogunate alone lasted from the 1600s up to 1868. I recommend you go and watch the extended miniseries called Shogun. It really has good writing, good political intrigue, and it stars the incomparable Toshiro Mifune, who in himself is working up to become a shogun in this miniseries. So you had your emperor who sat at the top, often out of sight and limited in his actual power, and then you had the shogun, the leader of this feudal military dictatorship. He appointed his administrators to run things, and they were called bakufu. Now the daimyo were feudal lords, and they had vast territories of land. And in Japan, land is power. Crops and fiefs were the lifeblood of the country, because without ample food, the people, the loyalty, and the power would all perish. The word daimyo is broken up into 2 words. Dai means large, and myo of myoden comes from the word private land. So it's giant landholders. It can also mean big name, implying an important family or a clan in the region. Now daimyo often hired samurai to guard their lands and paid them in estates, measured of yearly rice. Very few daimyo could afford to pay their samurai in money. So the daimyo could be viewed as commanders of the knights, kind of warlords, perhaps even landlords. Even with small areas of power, the daimyo were still technically subordinate to the shogun and the emperor figurehead. But when Japan started to have more war within the country, daimyo pushed back to become their own rulers until unification from the government would come once again. In the height of power, there were as many as 260 daimyo in the country. Many daimyo schemed for more land and favor. A smart daimyo would always employ some shinobi no mono on his team. He would want to gain access to different families, he would want to gain the military secrets, and he'd want to find out the weaknesses of all of the other clans around him. In order to maintain power for their sons, who would one day take over, daimyo would sometimes even enter into treaties, or they would marry off their daughters into other daimyo families. This literally, relatively speaking, kept some of the peace. We need to remember the context of change in status. There were many types of samurai, and they could move up and down in their lifetime. Their status, their hierarchy, their pedigree, their wealth, their family name, all of these could change very, very quickly. You could be at the top of the ladder one day, and then at the bottom the next. Wars in Japan made everything unsettled. Daimyo became fewer and fewer. Then they unified under Tokugawa Ieyasu around the year 1603. And a new structure of power was once again created, mostly benefiting the landowners and fortunate families. Just like all counties, cultures, countries across our shadowed past, we must remember that people are just people. They're corrupt, they have greedy hearts, they'll do almost anything to rip and uproot the family trees of power. And despite all the inaccuracies for the sake of saving face in Japan, the shogunate, the daimyo, the samurai, the myth of the ninja, all that legend, it was all just playing with power.